Hi Donovan, I wanted to send in my account because this happened just last year. I'm a helicopter pilot for a company who does flyover tours of Yellowstone National Park. I do 10 to 60-minute tours at a time. This happened last August when I took this couple on a 45-minute tour. We were about 10 minutes into the flight when the wife screamed and saw something near the river where we were flying over. The husband was yelling, "What is that?" I looked down and saw something running across the field and into the woods. This thing was massive, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing. It looked like a wolf, but it was running on two legs and had this massive stride. This thing covered more ground in one step than any human or bear I've ever seen. It was easily over 6 foot tall and probably weighed over 300 pounds. The wife said, "Oh my God, what is that?" Her husband replied, "It's a werewolf." I said, "That's impossible." But I knew what I just saw, and I really couldn't argue with what it looked like. It did look like a giant werewolf. What else runs on both legs like a human, but has a wolf's body? I took a slight detour from our normal flight path and headed over to the area where we saw it disappear into the woods. I hovered over for a few minutes but didn't see anything. But then right as I was about to continue on with the tour, we saw it again. This time running up the side of a mountain at an amazing speed. This time it was on all fours and was going up the steep side of the mountain with ease. We got a good look at this thing. It had this grayish fur and was extremely muscular, and had this very large wolf's head. It looked back at us, and I swear it smiled. It knew we were watching it, but didn't seem to care. We hovered for another 20 or 30 seconds before it disappeared again into some thick trees. I continued on with the rest of that tour. Needless to say, we didn't talk about anything else on tour except for what we saw. I've been flying here for over 5 years now, and this was the first time I saw anything like that. You will never catch me hiking the trails out there. I'll stick to the air. Thanks for sharing my story. In 2006, after I graduated from college, I moved back to my hometown in rural Ohio. I rented my place from my parents who inherited it when my grandmother passed away a few years earlier. It was a small cottage in the middle of nowhere, perfect for me. I loved it. One night I was out walking my dog Jasper in the woods behind my house, when all of a sudden he took off running, pulling the leash from my grip. He was like a bolt of lightning. One minute he was there and the next he was gone. We were only 20 or 30 yards into the woods, so I wasn't worried. But before I knew it, I had walked deeper and deeper into the woods, cursing Jasper for running off like this. As I rounded a curve in the path, I noticed something in the distance, crouching near the ground, half on the path and half off. The path was dark, and it was hard to tell, but it looked like it had two massive wings. The first thing that came to my mind was a huge vulture perched on its hind legs, but it was far bigger. As I began to get closer, it was crouched down low and now had lowered its head. So even though I could see its legs, I couldn't make out any features of its face or body. All I could do was stare at it in disbelief. Its back was hunched over. It looked powerful, but was also kind of frail, like a small adult hunched over with their hands on their knees. I was about 20 yards away now, and I could see that it had two massive wings, like a bat, but much larger. They were spread out behind it, and it looked like they would have been able to span at least 10 feet. Its head was turned slightly to the right, looking directly at me. Its eyes were glowing red in the moonlight. I remember thinking how odd it was that this creature had eyes that glowed. Vultures don't have eyes that glow or have big eyes. As I was staring, I heard movement to my left, and Jasper came flying out from under the branches. He was barking like a maniac. He positioned himself between me and this bird creature, like he was going to protect me. Unfortunately, I couldn't imagine any dog could protect someone from the likes of this thing. We were about 30 yards away now, and the creature had spread its wings out like it was going to take off. I could see that they were at least 10 feet across. Jasper was still barking, but this thing didn't seem fazed by him or the noise. It just kept staring at me with those glowing red eyes. I took a step closer, trying to get a better look at its face and body, but all I could see were these two massive wings and then darkness again. It took off into the night, flying low over my head and disappearing into the distance. Jasper stopped barking immediately after it left. I tugged on his leash to get him moving, but he wasn't budging. He was frozen in place, looking in the direction where this creature had flown off. I grabbed his leash and we headed back towards the house, both of us silent as we walked through the woods behind my house. When we got back, Jasper ran inside while I went inside as well. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the couch. I was a little scared and a little excited that we were both safe, but mostly I was curious about what I had just encountered. I grabbed my laptop and started Googling what this thing flying over could have been. As I descended down the rabbit hole, I discovered the existence of the mothman. I read about how people encountered this creature in various parts of the country all over the world. It was like everything I had been searching was right there on the internet, just waiting for me to find it. I started watching videos and reading articles, fascinated by this thing that had captured so many people's imaginations. The more I learned about it, the more convinced I became that this was what Jasper and I had encountered that night. I found your YouTube channel and I watched the first few videos. I was fascinated by the stories of people's encounters with other creatures and how that affected them. My wife and I were camping in the Black Hills area of South Dakota in October of 2000. We camped on the side of a mountain with a small meadow and a grove of trees about 50 yards away. We set up our camp in the late afternoon and decided to cook dinner and stay up late playing card games. We had a fire going in the pit in the ground and we were roasting a pork butt. We had a few bottles of wine and some beer chilling in the ice chest. Our tent was off to the right of us. Around 9 or 10 p.m., the night was very clear and you could see the full moon. My wife and I were just sitting there talking and listening to the radio a little bit. Then I heard what I thought was a deer behind one of the trees in the grove. I stood really still and tried to listen to hear it again, but it was quiet. The only thing that I could hear was my radio. My wife thought I was hearing things and suggested that we go to bed. We climbed into the tent, changed our clothes, and lay down to get some sleep. We talked for a while and started to doze off. I was half asleep when I distinctively heard something walking around the tent. But it was so loud and so close that it sounded like a horse or hooves clacking and stomping. My wife and I are very familiar with horses, having horses our whole lives and our kids having grown up on them. My wife was getting annoyed by whatever was outside of our tent and told me to get out of her way and let her see what was going on out there. I unzipped the tent and we both started to head out. She immediately signaled for me to get back in the tent and zip it up. What we saw blew our minds. I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. We both just sat there. I looked over my wife's shoulder and saw a large person or creature through the shadow casted from the fire pit. It stopped, then tilted its head back and appeared to be sniffing in the air. I yelled at the creature, trying to scare it away, but it didn't seem to notice. My wife and I watched this thing walking around our tent, but never got a good look at it. Only a silhouette against the moonlight. It was definitely walking on two legs, but it seemed very large. It was walking slowly and deliberately. We were both really scared and didn't know what to do. This thing had to be at least 6 or 7 feet tall. It had a broad shoulder build and was dark in color. From the quick glance we saw when we poked our heads out of the tent, we knew it was covered in hair. I couldn't see any facial features, and it suddenly got very quiet. My wife and I peeked out of a small sliver of the tent so we could see what was going on. It then stood up straight and started to walk away from us in the direction of the woods. It didn't make a sound. My wife and I were in a state of shock and couldn't speak to each other, but we just kept staring at this thing walking away into the night. My wife said she kept thinking this had to be a prank of some sort. I have no idea what we saw, but whatever we saw, it wasn't anything from this world. We both agreed that we should get out of there first thing in the morning. We didn't want to travel in the dark knowing that this thing was lurking out there. When morning came, we left, and we never went to Black Hills ever again. I was hanging out with a group of friends one Friday night in the woods. We were all seniors in high school, ready to graduate and leave high school behind. We had gone out to the woods to smoke some pot and hang out. It was almost midnight, about 11:30 or so, and there were some younger high schoolers hanging out near us. So to ditch them, we decided to go deeper into the woods. There was a cool stream that ran through there and some rocks where we could sit back and relax. We walked for about 10 minutes or so until we got to this area where the stream was. There were these rocks on either side of it, but it wasn't too steep or anything like that. My friend Josh led the way down the path towards the stream, while everyone else just hung back laughing and talking. I caught up to Josh and started walking with him. We finally got there and we were sitting on these rocks looking at the water. I was about 3 feet from Josh when I saw something move in front of us. It was a little ways away from us, but it looked like a person walking towards us. It had these long arms swinging back and forth, and it was moving pretty fast. I whispered to him, "What the hell is that?" Josh looked at me and then he traced my eyes to where I was looking and said, "Oh my God." He didn't hesitate and jumped off the rock and started running down the path we just came. Everyone else followed him except for me. I stood there for a second trying to figure out what he was so scared of. I didn't know what had happened. Then all of a sudden this huge thing came smashing through the trees. It lumbered past me and blended in so well before it disappeared into the darkness off the trail. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I ran after everyone else as fast as I could. I finally caught up with Josh and everyone else at the end of the trail. We were all huffing and puffing from running through the woods. We left the trailhead and headed back to where our cars were. We sat down next to each other and told everyone else what had happened and why Josh started sprinting out of there. Everyone else was freaked out, but Josh was the most scared. He told them he saw a Bigfoot. Everyone else started laughing at him, saying that he probably just saw one of the high schoolers from the other side of the woods. But I knew that wasn't what had happened. I had been right next to him when it happened, and I know for a fact that he saw something real. I tried to stick up for him, although I wasn't totally sure it was a Bigfoot. I knew it was some type of creature, though. Josh was spending the night at my house, and after everyone laughed at us, he was ready to go home. We stayed up all night talking about it, trying to figure out what we had seen. We couldn't come up with an explanation for whatever it was. It kind of looked like a bear walking through the woods, but it moved so fast and so erratically that you would have thought it was running instead of walking. And its arms swung back and forth as if it were swinging them in front of its body while running, like someone who was carrying something heavy. It seemed to be heading towards us when we first saw it, but then it changed directions quickly and disappeared into the woods. It wasn't aggressive or menacing. It acted more like it didn't want to be seen. It wanted to stay hidden. We talked about going back into those woods again to try to find more evidence or whatever we could, but we never did. Come to think of it, neither of us have ever gone back in those woods since. If you thought those stories were creepy and weird, well then check out this story right here. And don't forget to subscribe and tick that bell icon so you're notified when I release new videos. I try to release almost every single day and a few times a week on my true crime channel. The links are below.